All right, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us again for our Colorado ENP study session series. Today we're going to talk about 911 human resources. It was such a large topic that we had to create a whole second session for it. So I appreciate everybody being here. And these study session series are brought to you by the Colorado 911 Resource Center, the Colorado 911 Training Standards Institute, and the Colorado 911 program. I know we have Connie Johnson here, the director of the Colorado 911 Resource Center. And Connie, what kind of words of wisdom do you have for us today?
I just want to welcome everybody for participating, and I hope you get a lot out of this. They've been very good sessions.
Thanks, Connie. We will dive right into it. So as always, we are doing these study sessions live because we want to hear your questions. So chances are, if you have a question about something, someone else down the road listening to the recording will also have the same question. So please don't hesitate to raise your hand and ask a question. And if I can't answer it, we've got other people on the study session who will back me up and will be able to answer it. So with that, don't be shy, and we'll dive right in. So if you're following along in your ENP study guide, we are kind of bouncing around tonight. So the session or the section will always be up at the top, and then the subsections will be underneath. So as you can see, we're going to start with health and safety, which is section 4.8. And the first thing we're going to talk about is employee assistance programs, or EAP, and that's 4.8.1. So my guess is that a lot of you are familiar with employee assistance programs. These are programs that help employees with personal or work-related challenges that may impact their job performance, health, mental health, or emotional well-being. So sometimes people think that EAP is only for work-related stuff, and that's not the case. You can also have EAP that will help you with your personal challenges that we all go through in life. EAP, the whole point is that they are free, so they're generally free, also confidential, and also voluntary. EAP programs offer short-term counseling. They can offer referrals too. So EAP, a lot of the programs are set up to where you'll have a certain number of free sessions. So it's designed to be short-term counseling, but they can refer you to a long-term counselor if they determine that, or if you determine that you need to have a relationship with a therapist beyond the visits that the EAP program provides. And they can also provide follow-up services. So EAP counselors could also work in this is a great word, consultative role with managers or supervisors to address any employee challenges or organizational challenges and needs in helping to prevent and cope with workplace violence, trauma, and other situations. So you might have your EAP counselors come in and give training sessions or group sessions to your team to address some of those challenges. Next piece on health and safety is critical incident stress management, or CISM. So the World Health Organization calls workplace stress the health epidemic of the 21st century. And that's not just for 911 professionals, that's in general. So the risk of 911 professionals experiencing traumatic stress disorders is significantly higher for the general public. So that means that those of us in 911 have a higher risk of developing a traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD is identified in telecommunicators as somewhere between 18 and 20% at risk, suggesting that PSAPs expose workers to hazardous psychological working conditions. So NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, has partnered with the industry leaders to create model stress reduction programs, and critical incident stress management is one of those. If you want to read more on the NINA standard for stress management, the standard number is there, and you can go to NINA's website and check it out. But critical incident stress management is a form of psychological first aid. So it's described as a comprehensive, integrative, multi-component crisis intervention system. So in other words, the true full nature of critical incident stress management is designed to be multi-component. A lot of us, when we think about CISM or critical incident stress, we're thinking about the critical incident stress debriefings that we may have been part of after a large-scale incident. But CISM can be a comprehensive program that's designed for pre-crisis help, acute crisis help, and post-crisis phase. So it encompasses the whole gamut of the 911 experience, not just those critical incidents. But you can have interventions applied to individuals. You can have them applied to small groups, large groups, families, organizations, and even communities. You can do critical incident stress management as a community activity as well. So some of those interventions can include stress management education, stress resistance, and crisis mitigation training for both individuals and organizations. And disasters and other incidents that happen in the 911 center and out in the field may require something called RITS, Rest, Information, and Transition Services, crisis management briefings, and staff advisements. So these are all parts of critical incident stress management that go into this comprehensive program. Other components can include one-on-one crisis intervention or counseling, family crisis intervention, and organizational consultations. And then you can have follow-up and referral mechanisms available for assessment and treatment. So you can see that critical incident stress management as a program encompasses a lot more than just the critical incident stress debriefings that we're used to. However, the reason that you're familiar or maybe familiar with critical incident stress debriefings is because it's one of the two especially useful interventions. So defusing and debriefing. Defusing is a 3-phase structured small group discussion provided within hours of a crisis. So that's when you would get small groups together, and you do that within hours of that incident taking place. But debriefing, or critical incident stress debriefing, is a 7-phase structured group discussion that's usually provided within 1 to 10 days post-crisis. So you have the diffusing, which happens right away, and then you have the debriefing, which happens not quite right away, but still close to the incident. And debriefings are conceived as one component within that larger functional intervention framework, which is a fancy way of saying debriefings are only one piece of that critical incident stress management program that we just talked about on the last couple of slides. So the effectiveness of these CISM programs has been empirically validated through qualitative analysis, controlled investigation, and meta-analysis. So what's that bullet point saying? Basically, it's saying that critical incident stress management has been validated as a valuable piece of stress management for an organization to undertake. All right, so generic or general wellness. Historically, telecommunicators tried to handle stress by minimizing the impacts, the suck it up mentality, to be strong, and accept that stressful calls were just part of the job. I know when I started several years ago in 911, I was definitely taught that, right? You had to suck it up. And if you showed weakness or emotional reactions to the calls that you had, that just meant that you weren't cut out for the job, and you had to be strong, and you just had to, you know, this is what you signed up for. Stressful calls, what you signed up for. But research shows that this approach only complicates the impacts of 911 stress. So just because you push it away or compartmentalize it or try to deny that it's happening, doesn't make it go away. It actually just makes it worse. So psychological support for dispatchers is a recent phenomenon, thank goodness. Mental health practitioners and PSAT managers are much more cognizant of the stress that comes with the job, which is great because that means that they're taking care of their employees' mental health and wellness. So the National Wellness Institute defines wellness as a conscious, self-directed, and evolving process of achieving full potential. So we're not just talking about mental wellness, we're talking about whole person wellness. A multidimensional and holistic approach encompassing lifestyle, mental and spiritual well-being, and the environment. And they define it as positive and affirming. So my guess is that if you're going to see some wellness questions on the ENP exam, you'd probably expect to see that definition at some point. So there are 4 dimensions of wellness. You have the physical dimension. That includes things like diet and exercise and rest and relaxation and sleep. And notice that rest and relaxation is not the same as sleep. So you need that downtime to do things that fill up your cup, make you happy, to be physically well. Mental wellness is, of course, your cognitive and your emotional and your spiritual wellness. Social and professional wellness has to do with social networking and relationships in the PSAP. And your economic or financial wellness is your income and your retirement planning and your financial well-being. So you can measure wellness. The physical metrics can be your weight, your body mass index, your levels of cholesterol, or your stress tests. Financial metrics can be monthly cash flow, levels of debt, savings, or a well-funded retirement plan. And social metrics can be the number of friends you have, social activity, and even the number of smiles per day. Yes, it says that in the book. So these are not the only metrics, but these are some of the main metrics that you can use to measure your overall wellness. However, wellness can be difficult to achieve and maintain, especially in the face of shift work, overnight shifts, rotating shifts, weekends, and holidays, because it makes it tough to balance family and home life and work. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, because I know we have 911 professionals here, and you guys are all like, yeah, it's really challenging. It's important to remember that your experience of these dimensions are unique to the individual, and they can vary from one season of life to the next. So you can come into the 911 center and be in one season of your life, and as you go through your career, the seasons are going to change. You know, maybe your family makeup changes, maybe your financial picture changes, maybe you end up having to move, and so there are a lot of different things that go into those wellness seasons and can impact each one of those wellness dimensions. So it's essential to assess each dimension to make sure you're practicing self-care, including seeking outside help if necessary. And I just love that our profession is moving so much more into being supportive of outside help for everything: physical wellness, mental wellness, financial wellness, social wellness. It's okay to ask for help, because these dimensions greatly impact the positivity of workers and the PSAP culture. And you can imagine if you have someone who isn't well, that all-encompassing definition of well, then they're going to have a hard time coming into the center and being positive, or positively impacting the PSAP culture. So agencies might have wellness programs, and the goal of those wellness programs is to increase PSAP employee resilience. Okay, so what's resilience? The American Psychological Association defines resilience as, and this is a long definition, but bear with me, the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, such as family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace and financial stressors. And you guys are all saying, yeah, that's everyday life, right? In the 911 center. So APA says, as much as resilience involves bouncing back from these difficult experiences, it also involves profound personal growth. So the American Psychological Association is saying that resilience is also about how well you grow through these challenges that everybody goes through in life. So the California Post program has a program to build wellness capital to navigate high stress situations and to promote personal and organizational resilience. And I think that the study guide has this in here as like a model to show the possibilities and that it can be done. So that Post program has course instruction, combined with weekly assignments to build your psychological skills in each dimension of wellness. So they have a whole course on wellness. And that program measures improvements in psychological skills. So they start at the program inception and they measure the things that they want to measure as far as your psychological skills go. And then they measure again at completion. And that's a 2-month period that course is on. So that's one example of a wellness program and how it works. The good news is that research on the incidence and mitigation of acute trauma and traumatic stress and cumulative stress and depression among 911 professionals is advancing. So the leader in this particular field for 911 research is Dr. Michelle Lilly. And she found that 911 telecommunicators have that 18 to 24% PTSD rate compared to a 3.5% rate in the general population of men and 9.7% general population of women. So again, we are at high risk for developing PTSD as compared to the general population. Veterans and LGBTQ communities are also categories to consider when looking at the PTSD rate compared to the general population. So upholding wellness among those 911 professionals just depends on their access to core resilience sources, including peer support. Well, what's a core resilience source? It's talking about those sources of stress relief that you can tap in order to maintain your resilience and your resistance to those stressors. So peer support is one of those things. And peer support is assistance provided by someone who shares a commonality with another person based on experience with a particular or similar situation or event. So peer support means that you would get that support from someone who is also in the 911 profession, or maybe someone who is in the public safety profession. So if you have a peer support team that has representatives from fire and law and EMS and dispatch, all of those could be considered peers in that sense because you're all facing the same public safety challenges. So peer support can take a lot of different forms, but they all serve one goal, which is to provide a direct and relatable resource to support the cognitive, emotional, and psychological well-being of those dealing with person and work-related stress. Now I have to laugh. Person and work-related stress. I feel like maybe that's the most common cause of most stress is either people or work-related, but I digress. Peer support helps you talk to someone who understands the challenges that you're going through. And there have been instances where people will go to professional therapists and stress out the therapist and put them in tears because they aren't equipped to deal with what 911 professionals deal with or what field responders deal with. But peer support, the person who works in that profession with you understands and can support you in a different way. The most basic form of peer support is in the daily positive and supportive interactions between friends and coworkers. So you didn't know it, but joking around with your teammates and that kind of thing is considered peer support, even though it's informal. It's important to note that peer support is not intended to replace professional counseling services, psychotherapy, or other treatment by a mental health professional. So good peer support teams work in conjunction with mental health professionals and possibly the Employee Assistance Program or EAP to offer support and foster a safe and confidential work environment for everybody who chooses to participate. A peer support team is comprised of coworkers who understand the stress of the job and have volunteered to provide support to their fellow employees. So the key word there is volunteer. Mandatory peer support service probably isn't going to work all that great. And the team members who are selected to be peer support should receive training that is required to be a functional member of the team. And they really should be carefully selected to make sure that they're respected and trusted among their peers. So obviously, if you're picking someone for the peer support team, you should probably not choose the person who tells everybody's business all over the place, because that's not going to work out well. They have to be trusted and be able to keep confidentiality. The peer support team under clinical supervision functions within the parameters of the law, agency policy, and the scope of their training. So they get that training to know what's outside the scope of their abilities, and they need to be under clinical supervision, meaning under the supervision of a licensed therapist. So I'm just going to stop and see if anybody has any questions so far. I bet we have some peer support team, either members or agencies that have peer support teams on the call. All right. So then let's talk about how we can optimize our 911 response to calls. So the well-being and resilience of 911 professionals depends on how well prepared and equipped they are to manage those stressful calls. So there is a program called Emergency Health Dispatcher Training, and telecommunicators who complete that and use a 911 suicide protocol demonstrate significantly improved confidence, self-perceived effectiveness, and decreased anxiety. In other words, when you receive the proper training to handle these stressful calls, it helps your own resiliency. The suicide hotline is another component of wellness. So suicide is a leading cause of death in the US. There are 170 crisis centers created throughout the US and accessible through an 800 number. In July of 2020, the FCC adopted rules establishing 988 as the nationwide 3-digit number for suicide crisis assistance. And as of July 16th, 2022, service providers must divert all 988 calls to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which also serves as the access point for the Veterans Crisis Line. And the work is ongoing to make sure that 988 and 911 are interoperable, because sometimes 988 calls need to be transferred to 911 for dispatch. And the 988 call takers and dispatchers need to know how to make those transfers. On the other side, 911 dispatchers need to be trained to handle calls from those with mental health needs, either by transferring to 988 or through local policies. So it's important that 911 dispatchers are trained on handling those calls, whether they're going to go to 988 or whether you're going to dispatch to field responders, but in whatever form that looks like. There's also some risk assessment tools when it comes to wellness. There is a wellness assessment matrix, and that's a system that allows organizations to assess the risks associated with every policy, procedure, protocol, and incident type before anyone ever calls or arrives on scene. The acronym is funny to me, so WHAM integration. I'm just thinking about the band, that's because I'm old. WHAM integration provides supervisors with near real-time actionable data to ensure the employee gets a quick check-in to immediate intervention. So this wellness assessment matrix is designed to help supervisors assess the risk of injury, psychological injury to the 911 professionals. And this matrix becomes essential when you're working with incident-related imagery coming into the PSAP. So when we're talking about pictures and video coming into the PSAP, Nina recommends that you use the wellness assessment matrix to make sure that your people are okay when dealing with that imagery. So you can refer to the Nina Wellness Continuum microsite or webpage, which offers a comprehensive approach to wellness in the 911 industry. Tons of resources on that webpage. You can also refer to the book titled The Resilient 911 Professional, a comprehensive guide to surviving and thriving together in the 911 center by Jim Marshall and Tracy Lorenza. Woo! That was a lot of wellness. Does anybody have any questions on anything to do with 911 wellness so far? All right, well, moving on to environmental, still under the health and safety section, but now we're talking about environmental challenges. And so environmental issues impact productivity, motivation, and health. And as you can imagine, and you guys probably experience this yourself, you know, you're dealing with 8 or 10 or 12-hour shifts in a room that may be too hot or too cold or too bright or too dark, or maybe it's crowded or all kinds of things. And it's hard to work in those conditions. So the 5 main elements that are shown to impact productivity and morale are thermal comfort and temperature, not going to be surprising to anybody, noise control, crowding, ergonomics, and indoor quality. And there's a slide for each one of these. So temperature and the ability for individuals to control the temperature is very important. It has an impact on morale and attentiveness. And you can imagine it's really hard to concentrate on your job if you're freezing cold or if you're roasting hot. So I know that temperature is a hotly debated topic in almost every PSAP I've ever been in. There is an ideal temperature for desk work. It's 70.88 degrees. That's very specific. With a 1 to 2% decrease in performance, so for every 1.8 degree difference above and below. So if you put the thermostat at 73 degrees, you've just potentially decreased your employee's performance by 2%. And if you make it 67 degrees, then you've also decreased your, or potentially decreased your employee's performance. So good luck getting it to 70.88 degrees exactly. I mean, I say that as I'm sitting here with a space heater on my feet at home. Noise control. I know that noise control is also a hotly debated topic in 911 centers. And you can achieve noise control through things, absorption, so acoustical ceiling tiles, fabrics, and carpet that absorb the noise. Blocking, so all of those beautiful console furniture systems that have all these great walls and, you know, glass panels with the lights on and everything, they actually serve a function as well to block sound. So you can have the furniture system, you can have panels not tied into the furniture system, walls, partitions, and screens can all block noise. And then you can also do covering or sound masking, and that would be like white noise machines or fountains that have water, you know, the water noise. Those are the 3 ways that you can do noise control. People feeling crowded often react with feelings of stress, and this can be very subtle. So even if you don't realize that it's a source of stress for you, if it's a crowded area, that could place stress on you psychologically. So the perception of crowding can be reduced through the use of furniture, carefully placed plants, and decorative elements. And when my brain read that, I was like, ooh, fish tank. But you know, you can reduce the perception of crowding in a lot of different ways. Just depends on what you want to use. The ergonomic slide starts off talking about the cumulative trauma disorder, which is the excessive wear and tear on your tendons and your muscles and your nerve tissues caused by continuous use over an extended period of time. So people always think of carpal tunnel syndrome, which is one repetitive stress disorder or cumulative trauma disorder. So for example, if you have a video display that's not properly designed, so if your computer screens are all like up here and you have to spend your whole shift looking up like that, you're going to have CTD in your neck and the mid and upper body extremities. So the solution to that is to provide adjustable furniture, adjustable chairs. Yes, I know chairs are another source of tension in 911 centers, but it's really important to have a variety of chairs because we have a variety of body types and shapes and sizes in our people. So having those adjustable chairs is important. Movable monitor trays on your consoles, keyboard and mouse wrist rests, which I actually have like right here at my own desk to help prevent that. Task lighting is helpful as well. So when you're talking about environmental and especially different shifts, like the overhead lights on or off, that task lighting can be very useful at each console to help mitigate some of those challenges. And all of that is only effective if you provide training on the use of the ergonomic features. So if you don't provide training to your people and they don't know how to use any of these features, then it's not going to be all that effective. And finally, respiratory. A 2003 study found that reduced respiratory illnesses, allergy, you can reduce respiratory illnesses, allergies and asthma, and sick building syndrome, and you can increase your worker comfort if you make changes in thermal comfort, lighting, and improved indoor air quality. So when you go into buildings and you see those air filters, there's a reason for that. You can also improve air quality by using carpet, paint, furniture, and other workplace finishes with low counts of particulates, gases, or VOCs that can trigger illness. So if you go to the paint aisles in the hardware store and you see on the paint can, it says low VOCs, that means it's not going to overwhelm you with that paint smell for weeks and weeks after you put it on the walls. They have low VOCs. You can also look for low VOC carpet, furniture, and et cetera, et cetera. So some things to be thinking about if you're lucky enough to get to remodel your center. Other ways to stop the spread of illness include providing disinfectant wipes and mandating a complete wipe down of each position before the end of the shift, and to provide hand sanitizer throughout the PSAP and encourage regular hand washing. I don't know if this was written pre or post COVID, but I feel like we all got a lesson in that and probably still do that today. And here's some more resources. We kind of already talked about that, but there's the NINA standard, and the NINA Wellness Continuum website is also a really good resource. So that's the section on health and safety. Does anybody have any questions on anything we've talked about so far? What a quiet group tonight. Are you guys okay? Oh, good. There's a thumbs up. Thank you.
Great. Are you checking on our wellness?
I am checking on your wellness. I care about your well-being. All right. Scheduling. Go ahead.
I was going to put in a plug for the book of Resilient 911 Professional, and out myself that I'm chapter 9.
Our own Connie in the book.
Yep, they don't identify me as that. I had a conversation with the person that wrote it afterwards and said, really? That's the name you gave me? Okay.
Now we all have to go read chapter 9 and see what the name that they gave her was. Thanks, Connie.
You bet. It's one way to get you to read the book.
All right, I've read it. 4.11. So we're kind of going to jump around a little bit. So now we're at scheduling employee time. This is going to come as no surprise to anybody who works in a PSAP, but messing around with employee schedules is extremely challenging and can be extremely detrimental. So they want to make sure that when you create your work schedules for your PSAP, you're thinking about all kinds of different angles. So work schedules impact PSAP operations and personnel in terms of cost and in the terms of quality of services provided. So if you're thinking about it from the organization's perspective, you want to make sure that you're staffing correctly. If you're thinking about it from an employee impact perspective, you want to be thinking about the same thing. Labor costs represent the largest budget item for public safety agencies, and they have to be taken into account in every aspect of PSAP planning. On the other hand, public safety has to be ready to provide services on demand. And so that's not always translating to efficiency in the way that other businesses might define efficiency. So poorly designed schedules can contribute to boredom and fatigue, which can lead to absenteeism and lower productivity. And if you think about it, we hire adrenaline junkies and we want to make sure that we're feeding them enough adrenaline so that they're not bored, right? But we don't overload them. Characteristics which can contribute to these problems include long-term assignments on an undesirable shift. And I think it's important to keep in mind that what's undesirable to one person might be someone else's dream shift. So just keep that in mind. Frequent shift reassignments. So if you're constantly messing with your people's schedules, that's going to contribute to absenteeism and lower productivity. Inadequate time off, long periods of consecutive work days. People need time off, right? If you have short off-duty periods, so if you only have like 6 hours between shifts on a regular basis, that's going to lead to problems. Few weekends and holidays off. Again, that can be fairly subjective, but generally people need some holidays and some weekends off so that they can participate with the rest of the world that isn't working on shifts. And schedules that result in an unequal distribution of desirable shifts among employees. Again, desirable is in the eye of the beholder. I knew a lot of people in my time in different PSAPs where they really loved to work night shift and they didn't want to work day shift. And sometimes you end up with a lot of people who all like night shift and don't want to work days, and or vice versa. So this is constantly changing depending on the makeup of your PSAP. All that to say, what works for one PSAP might not work for another one. And as a manager, you have to take into consideration all the variables that exist for your PSAP before making those schedule decisions. But involving the people who are impacted by those schedule changes is crucial, as much as you can. You can also use reporting mechanisms to analyze call volume and answer times to determine when additional staffing is needed. So not to call out any one reporting, but you can definitely pull some of those reports to look at it and be like, okay, well, our busiest day of the week is X and our busiest hour of the day on average is Y, and so we need to staff accordingly. NINA also has a standard for PSAP daily personnel operations, and that standard there is, or that standard number is there, and you can go to the website and look that up as well if you want to. Other HR considerations can impact PSAP, such as labor unions and the presence of sworn versus non-sworn personnel. And the reason that that can make a difference is because there are different federal and state employment statutes that apply to sworn personnel versus non-sworn personnel. And labor unions definitely add a layer of complication. But you need to consider the health and well-being of your employees when building a schedule. And we're back to the American Psychological Association, which suggests that permanent night shift or quick changes between a day and night shift can lead to disruption of the body's natural circadian rhythm. It can cause an increase in fatigue and a general lack of alertness, which is never a good thing in the PSAP. So keep those things in mind when you're building your PSAP schedules. Any questions on scheduling? Super controversial topic in the comm center. All right, let's talk about quality and performance management. So this standard is actually a joint standard. ABCO and NINA got together and built this standard for quality assurance and quality improvement. The book said it's available at no cost. I'm not aware of either ABCO or NINA charging for any of their standards, but I think they just wanted to underscore the fact that they think quality management is really important, which I agree. And there's a standard for that, and it's available to everybody. So in the foreword to this standard, it points out that all the training in the world is useless without consistent standards, ongoing monitoring, and reinforcement to ensure those proper procedures and protocols are followed. So I know that sometimes QA and QA, QI is the one thing to fall by the wayside when staffing issues come up. But there's no way that you can determine whether you're actually doing what you say you're supposed to be doing without quality management. So there are 4 questions that drive that QA process for every employee. Every employee, even if they don't know it, even if they're not like articulating these questions, they want to know, what do I need to do? How do I do it? How well does it need to be done? And you're like, it's a 911 center. You have to do it perfect every time. And they, okay, but how well do I need to do it? And then how am I going to know I'm doing it right? That's where quality assurance comes in. So there are 10 best practices listed in the study guide on quality and performance management. Some of them are long and some are short. So the first best practice is to review the whole call, not just the intake piece. So you want to make sure you're reviewing the call taking and the dispatch of any particular call. And you want to score each of the 3 disciplines. So you want to score law enforcement calls, fire calls, and EMS calls. And of course, quality assurance or QA can happen on EMS calls for EMD, but they can happen on all 3 of those disciplines. Best practice number 2 is how many and which calls to QA. So the standard says PSAP should review a minimum of 2% of all calls, including both call taking and dispatch components. The calls should be chosen at random and should represent a cross section of employees. Everybody handling calls should be monitored. They list out your full-time employees, your part-time employees, your temporary employees, and then they said volunteer telecommunicators. And I just want to know who in the nation is using volunteer telecommunicators. I want to talk to them. But that's what the book says, so that's what's there. All low frequency, high acuity calls should be reviewed. So like your active shooters, your hazmat calls should be reviewed, as well as any other types of calls the agency deems important. So if your agency says, yep, we want to review every single call that this type of call comes in, great, that's fantastic. I am extremely interested to see how the standard gets revised with the advent of AI doing your QA. So there's some alphabet soup for you. But I know that a lot of centers are now moving to AI to do all their QA, which means theoretically you can QA 100% of your calls. So you're going to be taking the ENP exam based on what's in the book. The book does not talk about AI and QA, but I'm just curious about that, how that goes going forward. Best practice number 3, how to overcome resistance to your QA program. As you can imagine, some people really want that feedback and some people are going to be resistant to feedback. So the best way to overcome resistance to that QA program is to involve telecommunicators in the process from the beginning. So if you're just building your QA program, get your telecommunicators to tell you what they think should be reviewed, and have them help build the forms. You want to explain the objectives of the program. So why are we doing QA? Clarify exactly how they'll be monitored. There should be no surprises. What criteria are going to be used? How they're going to conduct the evaluations. Is it going to be in person or is it going to be on paper? How are you going to do that? How the data is going to be used and why it matters to them. And as I said, involve them in QA form design. We're still on best practice number 3. Allow telecommunicators to listen to their own calls and grade themselves. How many of you are like, oh God, I don't want to hear myself on the recording? Most people I know are like that, but sometimes you're your own worst critic and you hear things that other people wouldn't in your own performance. So listening to your own calls or having people listen to their own calls can be extremely beneficial. You want to phase in the program over a period of time. So solicit feedback and make adjustments along the way. And again, this is if you're building your program. You're going to have more success if you start by selecting a couple of positive calls for each telecommunicator so they're less fearful as they acclimate to the process. In other words, show them what they're doing right. We're still on best practice number 3. Employees must believe the program will be conducted with objectivity and fairness. If they think that you're going to use the program as a gotcha or that you're going to target one person or a group of people, you're going to have a hard time. So they have to believe, they have to have faith in the objectivity and fairness of the program. In order to do that, you need to make sure that the PSAP uses the same criteria to measure everyone all the time and that they calibrate their evaluators for consistency. And we're going to talk about that. Consider using QA forms during the hiring and onboarding process so that new employees understand how they'll be measured and evaluated and what skills, knowledge, and attributes are necessary to be a successful telecommunicator. All right, best practice number 4, setting up the forms and scoring the calls. Now, when I say the word form, I'm thinking paper. The vast majority of QA programs now are done electronic, but it's still a form that you're going through, whether it's an electronic form or a paper form. But your QA form should align with your standard operating procedures. Otherwise, what are you QAing? You want to address the entire intake and dispatch process, and you want to focus on 3 key areas. So adherence to SOPs or protocol compliance. How well did they follow that standard operating procedure? Your call quality, customer service is super important. And the required telecommunicator knowledge and or skills, which is not always the same as SOPs. So did they dispatch it correctly? Did they provide the right reference for this caller, and so on and so forth? Still on best practice number 4. So when you're setting up your forms, you want to create unique QA audit forms for each call type. So one form for law enforcement, one for fire, one for EMS, and also for different job responsibilities for within each call tape. So you have a call taking QA form for for law enforcement, for fire, and for EMS. And you have a dispatch QA form for law enforcement, fire, and EMS. Your QA scoring is going to be most effective when your questions are black and white. And that is so there's very little room for a person's opinion about whether or not this question was followed. QAE, which stands for Quality Assurance Evaluator, should only be able to select yes, no, refused. That's for if the caller refuses to provide info, not if the call taker refused to, ask the question. Or NA if the question is not applicable. So you might design your form to say, did the call taker verify the caller's address? And it's either yes or no, or the caller told them to do something rude, and you can write refuse. Best practice number 5 for setting up your forms and scoring calls. Oh no, we're still on 4. Why did I see 5? Anyway, still on best practice number 4. Determine a desired point value for each of those questions based on its relative importance to the overall job performance. So if it's extremely important to your agency that the call taker verify the address, that's going to have a high point value. It sends a signal to the employee that, hey, I really need to pay attention to this. Again, how well do I need to do it? Well, that tells me I better verify the address. But if I forget to get the caller's name and it's only 5 points out of 100, yeah, that sucks, but it's not a huge deal, right? But if I forget to validate or verify the address and I lose 40 points, that's a big deal. Include a checkbox for exceeds requirements in addition to meets requirements and needs improvement. You're going to use this so you can identify your top and recognize your top performers. And you can also identify telecommunicators who need additional coaching. So if you're going along and scoring and then you have a needs improvement box, you can check that to flag and send it off to whoever's responsible so they can realize, oh, this person needs some help. Still on best practice number 4, setting up forms and scoring calls. And once those forms are set up, you can score your calls. Target benchmark for a passing score should be 90%. That's what the standard says. And if you don't want to reinvent the wheel, you can download some sample QA forms. That's nice. Here we are, best practice number 5. I don't know what I was seeing earlier, but here we are. So best practice number 5, ensure timely reviews and employee notifications. In other words, don't wait to give the feedback. The standard says QA evaluations should be done ASAP after the event, no later than 5 days. So you should be giving that feedback back to your employees within 5 days of the call, which makes sense. I barely remember what I did yesterday. How am I supposed to remember a call that you're giving me a QA form back on that happened 3 weeks ago? 5 days. And employees should have the opportunity to review their evaluations and listen to their recordings prior to meeting with a supervisor. So that way they can make that feedback session more effective and productive, and you're not spending that feedback session going back and forth. Well, you did this. Well, no, I didn't. Well, listen to the call, and then you have to pull up the call and listen to it together and all of that. I mean, that has a time and a place, but it's more productive if the employees can listen to it ahead of time. Best practice number 6, accentuate the positive. QA is a great way to identify learning opportunities, but it's also a really great way to reinforce good behaviors and recognize excellence. In other words, catch them doing the right thing and praise them. You can use an exceed standards category on all your evaluation forms, and supervisors can use that to send messages of appreciation to telecommunicators or recognize them in other ways. What other ways, you might ask? There's a list for that. Some ways to recognize your top achievers: you can call them out in an employee publication. You can give them a letter of commendation from a supervisor. You can give them a pat on the back in the employee meetings. You can give them the opportunity to attend a regional or a national APCONINA conference, a preferred parking spot, or you can incorporate their calls as a best practice into a training curriculum. How cool is that? If you say, you know what, you did so well on this call, we're going to use it to train the new generation. I mean, that's pretty cool. And I think it's important to know that not everybody's comfortable with all of these ways of recognition, and the best recognition is the one that feels good without embarrassing somebody. Best practice number 7, consider adding screen recordings to QA reviews. So when the problems occur, just listening to the audio only paints a small portion of the picture. She can't see what the person is looking at. But there is software out there that will record and synchronize voice and screen recordings. So it'll capture screen grabs of what the telecommunicator is looking at while they're taking the call. And it can provide visualization of the full picture. It also can record a telecommunicator's interactions with multiple monitors and systems simultaneously. So if you've got, an employee who says, well, I missed this XYZ because I was looking over here, those screen captures can either prove or disprove and help provide a training opportunity for that person. Because again, QA is not about a gotcha. QA is about quality assurance, making sure that the agency is doing what it said it would, and quality improvement if it's needed. Best practice number 8, selecting the right quality assurance evaluator. The people you select for this role need to know your agency's policies and procedures inside and out, and they need to be thoroughly dedicated to the advancement of your agency. So again, you don't want to pick the people who just want to pick on people. You want to pick the people who truly care about your agency being the best it can be. Best practice 9, calibrate often for consistency. So what does that mean? That means that if you're going to have multiple people doing your quality assurance, you need to make sure that they're all evaluating the same way. Are you hearkening back to your CTO days when you were doing daily observation reports, right? You need to make sure that every quality assurance evaluator is using the same criteria to evaluate everybody. So you need to create and document QA definitions. Review those definitions with your quality assurance evaluators and your telecommunicators, and then calibrate reviews on an ongoing basis. So how do you do that? Senior management should review QAE evaluations. In other words, if I'm a quality assurance person and I did an evaluation, somebody at senior management should be looking over my shoulder and making sure I did it right. When you're first building your program, you should calibrate on a weekly basis because everybody's new at it, okay? As the program matures, you want to transition to bi-monthly or monthly calibration reviews. And you're like, monthly calibration reviews? And yes, you need to do it that often because people have procedure drift and people sometimes forget to look at the definitions and that kind of thing. So you should do monthly calibration reviews once your program's underway. Senior management should select at least one call taking and one dispatching incident and then grade the incidents. And then you ask the quality assurance evaluators to do the same. Then you all get together and discuss it and make sure that everybody graded the same, discuss outliers and rectify discrepancies in the calibration sessions. So if you've got one quality assurance evaluator who's grading harder or softer, that person needs to be calibrated. And that's what calibration is. Finally, best practice number 10, let technology do the work for you. Many PSAPs conduct their QA manually using over-the-shoulder monitoring, manual call selection, and paper evaluation forms and methods. If someone was standing over me doing QA on every call I took, I'd be stressed. We'd be back at the well-being section, okay? It's costly, it's time-consuming, and it's intrusive. So QA software solutions streamline every aspect of the QA process. It's a NINA ENP study guide. They're not going to call out specific companies. Suffice to say that when this book was released, there are lots of QA software solutions, and that's true about AI as well. So let your technology do the work for you. Who has questions about quality and performance management, or thoughts or comments? All right. All of that on quality management and one slide on training and development. So 4.16 says each component of training is important. Your basic training is super important, your advanced training is important, and your continuing education is important. But all training should be coordinated with operational procedures and reinforced through QA reviews. In other words, when you're developing your training program, make sure that you're including your SOPs, and then you reinforce it through QA to make sure that they're doing what you train them to do. Training should be part of daily operations and not viewed as support or punitive. In other words, you train because that's the right thing to do. People who are doing the training should be appropriately certified active telecommunicators. Those are the ones that should be doing the training. This increases the program's credibility and helps keep the training program in line with actual operations. And believe it or not, that is all it says in the book about training. So, who has questions about anything we talked about today?
Hey, Jennifer, this is Daryl.
Hi, Daryl.
So back in the wellness section, I had read somewhere, I don't know where it was, that the best way to deal with stress and negative emotions is to pack them down deep inside and never let them out. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct. Current research says that the best way to deal with it is to deal with it and not just stuff it away. Let's see if I can find that slide. Actually, in all seriousness, that was the way that we were taught for a long time. And it just is not, it's actually increases the impact of the stressful things that we see. And so here's that slide. It only complicates the impacts. And so it's much better to have psychological support, critical incident stress debriefing, EAP programs. I know a lot of agencies that have incorporated therapists in their operations. And there's just so much more information and research on mental health and wellness than there used to be in the 911 profession.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that a little bit because I won't include you in this, but us old timers, that is how we were trained. I remember my trainer at my first 911 center bragging about how no call ever gets to him because he's got ice water in his veins. Now, today he's a college professor and he has completely done a 180 on this and realizes that that was not the correct approach.
Yeah, I was also taught that way. I'm guessing based on the people who are here that most of us were trained that way in the beginning of our careers. But it's so much, there's so many more resources and so much more recognition that telecommunicators are human beings, and it's much better if you process your feelings and your emotions and work through them rather than just stuff it down, suck it up. I can remember one call that just really got to me. I seriously thought this person was murdered on the phone. She turned out to be totally fine. I got off the phone and had to go down the hall and totally just lost it. I was crying. I was scared. I seriously thought she was dead, but it wasn't my fellow employees that helped me deal with that. It was just, okay, yep, dry the tears, get up, go on with it. But that was 22 years ago and I still remember it. So what kind of impact did that make? Much better to deal with it healthily. Good question. Who else has questions or thoughts? Things that have worked better for them?
I can give you an example of shootings in Cortez. When the one that got me written up in the book and the one that happened a year and a half ago. And I was gratefully able to listen to and help that dispatcher that was sitting in that chair when the officer was killed in November. And she's doing well. She's thriving. And I was really grateful to be part of her journey.
I am so glad, Connie. Yeah, I think it's just so much more understanding of how to support 911 professionals in processing the things that they hear and now we'll see with the imagery that's coming. So kudos to Nina for developing the wellness standard and the wellness continuum and the resources that we have now.
Yes.
I agree. And kudos to you, Connie, for supporting your team that way.
Thank you. And I found in listening to some others around the country that to be open and to be able to be available to try to help those through those difficult calls. And
Yeah.
like what you were talking about, Jennifer, what the outcome was isn't what the impact was. The impact was the call on you.
Yeah, well, I think what you just described is peer support in a really powerful way. And I'm just so glad that you were able to be there for her and that she's really doing well.
Yeah, she sent me a video of herself going through taser training just for the heck of it.
Well, we're still a twisted bunch in what we find fun.
This is true.
Any other thoughts or comments or questions? All right. Well, thanks so much for being with us. Next week, we have Michael Berry back teaching us. So please join us again next Thursday at 6. And guys, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks so much for being here.